Hi everyone, I'm Zayas, and today I'm here to review Jujutsu Kaisen. This is Gege Akutami, aka Dokudami Milk's first big work. His previous works were a couple of one-shots where you can really start to see his love for supernatural manga. Jujutsu Kaisen 0 showed some potential, but it was pretty short and more of a precursor to Jujutsu Kaisen than anything else. The whole landscape of supernatural shonen manga is changed nowadays a lot, mostly due to the fact that there's these big shonen series like Demon Slayer, like Jujutsu Kaisen, and Chainsaw Man that got a vast amount of success in the past few years. The author of Chainsaw Man, Fujimoto, even said that Jujutsu Kaisen and Dorohedoro were his main inspirations for making Chainsaw Man. And these type of supernatural manga are very much different from the early supernatural manga back in the early 2000s and even the early 2010s when there was a lot more yokai and spirit-focused shonen manga. Think of series like Soul Eater, Inuyasha, Mushishi. A lot of these new series focus more on these hideous monstrosities. And now, before I rip into this series too much, I'd like to say that I actually enjoyed the first 100 or so chapters of this series. But as soon as the Shibuya incident arc started, the series became garbage. Now, what's so good about the first half of Jujutsu Kaisen? Well, the story isn't anything that you haven't heard before. A young boy gets a massive amount of power and is considered dangerous because of it and persecuted. There's no real crazy, unexpected turn of events in Jujutsu Kaisen or super deep, multifaceted characters. But that's not really the point of Jujutsu Kaisen. The point of the series is to have two pretty cool looking characters collide and crash in a battle and punch each other until someone dies. Bleach is the big influence that Akutami cites, and he's even done an interview with Kubo where he kind of fanboys about Kubo. And I didn't really see the comparison to Bleach at first, but then when I thought about it longer, I realized that they're both supernatural series and they both focus about these characters who look super cool and have vastly different abilities, and they crash in battle for some pretty hype action scenes. And just like Jujutsu Kaisen, I actually enjoyed the first half of Bleach quite a bit, but I think Akutami maybe took a little bit too much from Kubo, as he also has the same problem where the series ends up being complete garbage after a certain point. And just on the note of references, there's tons of references littered in here to big shonen manga, like Naruto, like Bleach, like Hunter x Hunter, Yu Yu Hakusho. There's tons of shows referenced in here. Even some smaller works like GTO are brought up briefly. The one reference that I never picked up on and just realized recently was Mazinger Z was actually referenced in the first chapter of this series. And literally just by coincidence, I happened to review that a few days ago, and I had no idea this series had a Mazinger Z reference, so that was pretty cool. But in most of Jujutsu Kaisen, Akutami is pretty aware of what makes Jujutsu Kaisen good. He just makes some cool characters, minimizes the downtime between these great fights, and makes some pretty sick looking enemies. And there's tons of characters with cool character designs and even personalities. My favorites were Nanami, Gojo, and the panda. I think he did ruin the panda bit a little bit by giving the panda a more serious backstory. It would have been funnier if he was just some random panda and they never explained it. But hey, at least we got gorilla mode. The whole standard shonen protagonist speech that Itadori gives sometimes doesn't really help him as a character. I think apart from that, he's pretty decent, but I don't like it when he does that kind of stuff. And my favorite character by far is Todo. Todo has this big, retarded, masculine energy that I just love in characters. And he just goes around asking people what the type of girl is. And, I'm going to have to agree with him. Tall girls with big asses are pretty great. Sadly, not many girls in Jujutsu Kaisen do have massive dump trucks. You might have to go to prison school for that. Now, on top of there being some great-looking characters on the protagonist side, there's also some great-looking villains. In particular, I like Sakun, the volcano guy, the tree guy, Jogo, whatever you want to call them. They all look pretty good. They're all pretty distinct, have these unique identifying features, and have tons of personality. The action scenes don't have the same big impact a lot of the big shonen manga do, like JoJo's or King and Asura, but the action scenes still manage to be pretty enjoyable as we get to see a lot of these characters' personalities in their domains and their abilities, or their territories, or whatever you want to call it. I would say the fighting styles and the different matchups are probably the most intriguing part of Jujutsu Kaisen, and slowly being revealed stuff about how powerful certain characters are. Now, even before the series gets really bad with the Shibuya incident, there still are some flaws to the story of Jujutsu Kaisen, even when it's good. I think the villains are used a bit too much. The same 3 villains are fought for over 100 chapters, and sometimes it just can feel like there's no progress being made with the character just fighting the same villain and then they'll escape. And on top of this, I wasn't really a big fan of Mahito. He seemed pretty childish to me. It didn't seem as interesting as some of the other villains in the series, and he was fought probably the most. Some characters also just didn't do it for me. Megumi was hyped up quite a bit, but wasn't quite as interesting as I thought he would be. But regardless, the first few arcs were pretty good. The flashback also was pretty good. We got to see Gojo, we got to see Suguru, we got to see Zen and Toji get some action, and it was pretty hype. I would have also liked to see more of the monsters rather than these human-like curses. There weren't very many monsters past a certain point in the series. It seems like he wanted to focus on only a couple antagonists. Oh yeah, and Black Flash, that was a mechanic which I thought was kind of dumb and overused. Especially, they just introduce it and all of a sudden, oh, just backflashes 10 times. Or, oh, there's an enemy, I need to use backflash to beat him. Oh, I guess I'll just use it. And it becomes pretty meaningless and doesn't feel like it has as much impact as when it was first introduced. I've been talking about the Shibuya incident for this whole video, and this is where I dropped the series when I first read it. And at first I didn't realize why I disliked the series so much, but I just decided it was time to stop. Now that I'm coming back to it and taking a deeper look into it, I realized that there were so many things that had gone wrong with the series. It was hard to enjoy it at this point. The Shibuya incident is probably the worst recorded incident in all of humanity, ever since the I'm not seeing enough movement incident. I'm going to include a little spoiler warning here. So if you are somebody who only watches anime or something like that and you don't want to get spoiled, I'd recommend you stop watching here because there are some big plot events that happen later on. Every single important character in Jujutsu Kaisen was either killed off, sealed, or just written out of the story. And it's just horrendous. You get 100 chapters into this manga, and every character you care about is just gone. Itadori and Megumi are the only ones left after the incident, and while I do think Itadori isn't a horrible protagonist, Megumi wasn't my favorite, as I said before. Todo makes a reappearance, which I was waiting for, and although he does come back into the series, his impact was nowhere near as big as when he first came in, and he makes a Hunter x Hunter reference, which I thought was kind of lackluster because there wasn't really much impact in that scene at all or any sort of tension when compared to the Hunter x Hunter scene, which had a bunch of build up and it was super hype. Now past this point there's tons of references to Hunter x Hunter even in this arc, and although I'm a big fan of Hunter x Hunter, I love to see it getting attention. I just think that Akutami can't really do the same things that Hunter x Hunter was able to do with creating this massive world that was super interesting, this power system where there was a ton of creativity involved, these characters that were pretty complicated and complex. I just think Akutami tries to go for this, but he doesn't really reach it. I think he would have been better off sticking to his old style, simple fights with cool characters, maybe introducing a few more characters, or giving some of his old characters some hype new techniques. Now, I mentioned beforehand that stuff like Black Flash was abused a lot before, but in Shibuya, this is where power systems get abused way too much. The characters are free to do anything that Akutami wants them to do. There's a lot of ass pulls. A lot of moments just leave you feeling like, how did this happen? The whole Gojo thing. Itadori fighting people that he shouldn't be able to fight and becoming massively overpowered out of nowhere. This arc just felt like a complete mess. It was so sloppy. The pacing felt pretty all over the place. There was characters being introduced for like 2 chapters just to be never mentioned in the series again. There's characters who have been massively important to the series and crucial, just dying off and being given like 1 panel of mourning. The action scenes can't even save this manga anymore. When they were first introduced, there were some unique abilities, and it was cool learning about what these characters could do. But at this point in the series, most characters just use the same abilities and techniques they've been using the entire time. There's nothing really creative or innovative here, and the characters just get stronger over time. They just get more curse power, and I think that's the most boring form of power scaling someone can do, just giving someone more energy, giving Goku more ki or whatever you want to call it. Sukun finally made a comeback in this arc, which I was waiting for, but contrary to my expectations, he didn't really make a big splash. He just sort of did a bunch of stuff and then just left. He didn't really make any big plans for the future or anything like that. And it kind of made me wonder, why has Sukun not used his word, which he implemented like way back at the start of the series, to like have some action in the series, have some impact in the series. He's just been sitting on the sideline doing nothing for the entire series. But it was also at this point when I realized that when Itadori swallows these fingers, he actually swallows them whole. I didn't think about it before in the series, but Yuji must have some serious throat game to swallow these fingers with the nail on. Probably gives crazy head. None of the new characters really live up to the old characters in the series. There are some okay ones like Yuta being introduced, but there's nothing really memorable that sticks with you or is super interesting about these characters. Now, I mentioned beforehand how these villains have been in the series for so long, and they've been fighting the same dude for like 100 chapters. Now, it seems like Akutami finally realized this, and decides to kill all three of them at once. And it's not even very impactful. It doesn't feel like the protagonists have like conquered some hurdle. It's just that, oh yeah, the boss is done with these dudes, he's just throwing them away now. And the last few fights just feel so much more meaningless after this. Maki was the one character in the series who was kind of hot to me, but now she's no longer hot, which is pretty sad. And her story feels more like a side story in the series than like part of the main plot, and it felt kind of disjointed. Now, I mentioned before how he's trying to be more like Hunter x Hunter in the most recent arc, and I think this is turning out horribly. He tries to make the series more complicated, but it just gets convoluted, and it's not really like complex, like deep combat. They punch each other, they ask each other a few questions, and then okay, they go on their way. All these characters being introduced into the series and then disappearing like 1 or 2 chapters later makes it feel like these characters don't really have much importance. It's hard to feel attached to a lot of these characters when you know they're gonna not be here in 5 chapters. I'm pretty infuriated with the direction that the manga has been going in recently. The manga had a bunch of potential, it had some cool characters, it could have made some interesting fights, but no, I guess we're just going in the complete opposite direction. And one of the biggest faults of the manga in recent times is that it focuses less on the action and more on the story. And Jujutsu Kaisen's story is certainly nothing special. There's no real main goal in the story here. It's hard to see the overarching theme, what these characters want to achieve, what the end goal is of this series. Is it to get rid of all the curses? Because if that was the case, then none of the main characters are really thinking about that or doing anything to stop the curses. Some of the side characters are, but nothing the main characters would want to do. This series is certainly a waste. I still enjoyed the first little bit of it. You can still get some enjoyment out of this series, but the later parts of this series just really rub me the wrong way. I'm feeling a decent to strong 5 on this series. Tell me what you thought about the series below. Have you read up to the recent chapters? Because if you didn't, maybe you like the series. Thank you everyone for watching. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to review. Leave a like, leave a comment. Thanks everyone. See you later.